building and not see it clear. So we talked several times, and then that was also one of the times where we were walking up the mountain road, Ken Ring and I, and he asked me the question, meaning spiritually speaking, or on the other side, in other words, after clinical death, or no matter what level you're on, or in heaven, he meant all of that. He said, Tom, on the other side, is there ever such a thing as a mistake? And I had a similar reaction, and I wasn't able to answer him for many minutes. And Ken Ring was good for that. In other words, he would just be patient. And then I finally nodded my head yes, and he didn't pursue it, being the friend that he was. And then it was probably 5 full minutes of walking further that I was able to say yes. And I just said, yeah. And then I couldn't talk anymore. And that was also very important around that time for, bear with me if I say my development. In other words, being able to rationalize and deal with things like this. Well, now what I want to add is, again, that was 1 year and 7 months roughly prior to the event. I was aware that it was not this coming hot weather. I often just say seasons. And of course, 103 degrees would pretty well demand that it wasn't January or February. That it was in the United States, of course. It was 103 degrees Fahrenheit outside, which is an odd number, so it eliminated a lot of the usual airports. Excuse me, during that time, I kept track of and watched airports on television. By the time this whole thing was over, 1.5 years later, I do have to admit, I don't know if Elaine should hear this, but I purposely I manipulated tickets that were paid for, and sometimes I can say, look, this is a direct flight, and I've got some spare time. Can you send me to a couple of different airports? And the people at the airlines were real helpful that ways. And one time I went to 4 airports to get from Philadelphia to Rochester. And I went all over the eastern seaboard. Well, what I was doing was to physically going and seeing. What I knew was if I went to the place, I would be there. In other words, I would know it right away and I would see it. And I've been sorry for that in hindsight. I mean, it wasn't to be, but still, the aspect where could I or should I have done more?
Okay. Tom, I think we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue through the several meetings that you had where a lot more details came out right up to and through the event.
Okay, good. Okay. Now, the test of the viewing audience is to see what's different about this picture. Well, my eyes might not quite be as bloodshot, but there is something else that's different about this picture. And it's a test to see if you notice the difference, because it's something that anybody who's seen me before should notice. Wouldn't you agree? Right. And if you're showing this film, you can stall for a second and then make the announcement as to what the difference is. I won't give any hints, will I? Okay, now back to the subject. And we had talked about the conversations in Connecticut mostly, and the actual precognition as it took place, how it developed. Now it's from, in a way, the power of suggestion that somebody said a mistake about the general subject matter in regards to that particular plane and that subject that was wrong. So in correcting them, it brought to mind, if you will, my awareness of this upcoming precognitive disaster.
Now, Tom, did that trigger a memory of your life review?
Right. In this case, and this may be new to a lot of people, or just the realization awareness, I have had happen to me just spontaneous precognitions, like, oh wow, do you know what's going to happen? Or, oh wow, what's happening now? And that's one type, where for no apparent reason or some ulterior motive that I may be involved in it or not involved or something like that in the future. But in this case, they saying a mistake, there will never be another crash in the L1011. It was not a power of suggestion that I started thinking about L1011s and then suddenly precognicizing the next plane crash of that type of an airplane. It didn't work like that. There is a characteristic with me, and I know of other people who have had a near-death experience, or say in a particular time in their life, a spontaneous spiritual awakening, where as a result of that, their psychic ability has been greatly enhanced. They usually say enhanced. I'd like to say disturbed. Enhanced. So therefore, we can blame it on my near-death experience, but part of my near-death experience was an attunement or at one-ment with total knowledge. And in the last stage or stages of my experience, it was, I've said the sentence that I became totally homogeneous with the light. The light is total knowledge. Therefore, for the splittest of second out of time, I was total knowledge. Well, I'm certainly not total knowledge now. It's a physical impossibility. And therefore, I'm emphasizing total knowledge. So it would be true to say, if you experience total knowledge, you have to know everything. All right, so if at one time or out of time, I knew everything, what I'm leading up to is, with the suggestion they said there will never be a crash in an L1011, first I had to correct a mistake. But in order for me to correct that, I had to know that there would be another crash in an L1011. As to where and when, that may or may not have been in my perception. The point I'm trying to bring up or get to is that as that took place, consciously, I knew nothing about the next crash of an L1011. I did not know about that from 1970, any time before, 1978, right through the conversation that was had in Connecticut. But to answer them, knowing that that's a lie, that that's a discrepancy, and I have to correct it. As I said that, that's not true. That came to my conscious level. Many of the details of the fact that there will be another crash. And that if it's another crash, that next crash will be like this. In other words, all that information flooded out. But what I'm saying is, what do we call it? Either that information was already stored or I was already aware of it on a very subconscious level, or shall we call it a superconscious level? Meaning the same thing as a subconscious level, but on a high enough level that things of that nature can be divulged. In other words, I certainly didn't learn that in school or in any time in my life. So out of my life or super consciously. Things can be learned in the same way in an extreme meditative state and not known after you wake up. But a week or 2 weeks later, a month or a year later, that information simply comes out and you know what to do. You know where to go, you know what to do, and that may even be confusing to you. So in this case, I'm claiming that this was knowledge that I had been exposed to, but that I didn't know. In other words, I didn't know on a conscious level at all. I wasn't aware of it. But as opposed to, say, somebody yelling out December 17th, like what happened to me one time, Ken Ring yelled out December 17th, and that date was the catalyst for me suddenly thinking in terms, like mathematically, the next December 17th, this, and this is going to happen. Now that happened, and I knew many things that were going to happen on that date. That was like the power of suggestion. And that could have been triggered spontaneously. Unlike this situation where the information was perceived during my near-death experience as part of the total knowledge, and now because I'm needing it or using it in the general subject matter, that information is surfacing to my conscious level. And in a psychic way, yes, but more in a spiritual way, that the total package was not just a wham, oh my goodness, a precognition of this nature. It was that now I'm certainly start to think of all this information that I have in me. It's also not saying that I've got all information in me. I can't claim that. I certainly never feel that way. And yet, in various circumstances, the right information surfaces now and then. It's the same as answering the question, well, if you're truly psychic, then what's going to happen tomorrow? Or if you're truly a psychic, then are you a psychic 24 hours a day? Which is ridiculous. Because, for instance, right now, I can know things, like, say, just by the desire of knowing that right now in Frankfurt, Germany, there is a yellow alert for the military. Now, that's because my baby boy is there, and that's happening in this time frame. Not this exact clock time, but today. Whatever today's date is, it will be today. And a rough figure within 24 hours of today even. All right, that can be manipulative, and I may or may not be able to do that. Such as just walking in our intermission that we just had, walking around, and just before we started up, I just thought, gee, I better make a phone call and call in the water break, which is taking place right now on Melbury Boulevard.
Or as such as the other night when you were calling me to tell me you could go to Sedona, and as you were dialing, you picked up the earthquake that was happening in California.
Now, see, I don't remember that hardly at all. I remember calling you.
Uh-huh.
So,
Well, what you said to me was, do you want the good news or the bad news?
oh, now I remember.
And I said, give
Yeah,
me the
that's-
good
you know-
news, and you said, I can. The Bay Bridge is falling. And then you had to hang up.
Yeah, now
Now you remembered.
Yeah. You know, again, we can even laugh at that.
Yeah.
But now, see, just then, I had not really blocked it out of my mind, but I had purposely forgotten that. Or, in other words, it wasn't in my mind at all.
Uh-huh.
And it is typical of me to be like cute or sarcastic or funny
Yeah.
when it's something very serious.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the ways that I could deal with some things that are extremely emotional and so on. And the time frame of that phone call, well, in other words, I did say that.
Yeah.
Whoops. And then many other details, because that was also a major event. Well, now skeptics and so on will say, all right, if you know about an earthquake, then how come you missed the plane crash last week? Or how come you missed the Mount Etna blowing up?
Yeah.
And let me put it this way. If you're dealing with something like a major event, you can't be expected to know every leaf on the lawn right now, and
Right.
in other words, where all three of your kids are right now. Or
Yeah.
in other words, if you're in tune or in a state of atonement or at one with anything, the highest probability is that you can't do anything else.
Yeah.
That either just the focusing or the awareness, even if it's on a spiritual level, where I have said that you can do more than one thing at a time, but the probability is that you can't.
Yeah.
And that, let me put it this way. The result of this event, the plane crash, and the date that it happened was, again, I don't know how many years from 1978. Well, from 78 to 85.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so many years. In all that time, I've experienced many psychic things. This event was the first, and there have been two more since, but was the first time that I had to come home from work. And that was major, because I promised publicly that the very first time that anything like this would interrupt my normal daily routine, meaning my work, my employment, or my family life, that, well, of course, a kind of silly statement, I said that I'll shut up and I'll never say another thing out loud. Is, we can laugh at that now but my intentions were that it's very important for nothing psychic to interrupt my employment.
Yeah.
And in fact, I did have to come home from work the morning just prior to the clock time of the event in Texas. And what I did, I came home and I was a little distraught. I was extremely angry at myself because also time had run out.
Uh-huh.
And that meant that unless I could make a quick phone call, I mean, even something as crazy as like call a bomb scare to try to get,
Yeah.
but by that time the plane was already in flight.
Yeah.
And in other words, it was that realization that even though I decided that I wanted to do more than what I should have, and I took on more than what I should have, I was in the midst of that and I still hadn't given up. And this was a realization that it's about to happen and there's nothing that I can do. So I was angry at myself for failing. So again, my judgment that I failed. And then I was distraught over the intensity of the event because it was a major event, a tragedy. Also, my personalized spiritual and psychic and realistic psychological relationship with everybody aboard the plane and the mechanic and again the people involved mostly. And then also the sensationalism that I had actually produced by using it over and over and over again as analogies.
Right.
So the day of the event, I did have to come home, and in fact, it was also one of the very rare occasions that, as a yell for help, nobody was home, and I needed somebody. It shouldn't have been Elaine, by the way. I mean, I would have only disturbed her, and I didn't want that. So I called the University of Connecticut Hospital and called Dr. Bruce Grayson, who's a very good personal friend of mine, and also just happens to be a psychiatrist. Well, he's involved in the research, and he was quite aware of many things that I had said about the plane crash ahead of time. So when I called him, he recognized my voice, but he also recognized the stress or distress and so on in my voice. And I was not speaking eloquently. So he said, Tom, I think I know why you're calling. He said it fluently, and he said, trying to answer for me because I wasn't really able to talk too well. And he said, I think I know why you're calling. And then he said, is this the day? So I just said yes. And then we just held on the phone. Yeah. And I mean, that was perfect for me. And I appreciate he having to take that phone call even. In other words, it wasn't his job. I never paid him or anything like that. He took the phone call as a friend. And that was also very helpful. Well, so that's how emotional it was. And it was, up to that point in time, the most dramatic and traumatic for me. All right, now I want to backtrack because I want to get back on track and state that in the months between the precognition and the event that took place, what I had done incorrectly, I'm judging myself now and saying that I was wrong in using that event, that upcoming event, as an example of analogies of other things. In other words, if somebody in a group talk would say, Tom, give me the difference between a precognition of a tragic nature and something that you would feel very joyous about. Well, there are so many aspects of this plane crash that were negative and traumatic that I would give that as a quick example. Now, it wasn't up to me to claim that this was a real event that hasn't happened yet, because I didn't have the requirement to do that. I was only giving an analogy, but it's most comfortable for me to give facts rather than actually make up a hypothetical analogy. And that is typical of me on an ongoing basis. So what I did inadvertently at first and then quite regularly, at least once every other month, in a group talk or even talking to a single person, I would say, well, let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, there's going to be a plane crash. Now, if it's a big plane or this or that or that, in other words, I would go on with the details as the analogy, and it would work quite well. First of all, I'm using all the facts and phrases that were just that. And it would be easy for me to remember that. And I would be clever enough to give the facts and figures and yet not become emotionally or psychologically attached to the upcoming event. Well, this took place several times at Mary Ann's talks and Mary Ann and Joey's hairdressing salon, and where we'd have anywhere from 5 to 24 people show up just, to chit-chat back and forth. Sometimes we'd illegally call it a meditation I mean, and what's really funny is I have never meditated at any of my meditations. Again, what's in a word, what's in a phrase? It's really an excuse to get together and talk. So there was one fella, I think his name was it Chuck or Charles? Do you remember? Was it Charles, I think? All right, and I can't identify him right now, but I think it would be a good idea to look him up, because if he still has those notes, that could be used for research or investigation. At any rate, he had been to 3 or more talks in a row consecutively, and he had been taking notes in a spiral notebook. And he had personally asked a couple of questions, so directly to him, I gave various analogies. So this one time I was complaining about my inability to deal with time accurately. And, I mentioned that sometimes I can only figure out, well, it's the warm season. Or it's the warm weather of 1988. I'm kind of famous for having said that several times. Or by the end of the warm season of 88. That was quite well known. So he then said, Tom, I'd like to make a statement if I can, and then I want to ask you a question. I said, oh, sure. He said, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but I've been to several of your talks in a row, and I've also been taking notes. And he said, and he went like this with a spiral notebook. And he said, here's what I think. He said, first of all, when you give analogies, very often you give analogies of a plane crash. Now, what I think that you're giving not only an analogy of a particular plane crash and using the same one over and over again, but I think it's real. I think it's real, and it hasn't happened yet. So I was shocked by that. Now, I wasn't shocked that I was deceiving him all along and he caught me. I was doing this inadvertently. And I was not aware that it was typical of me to give an analogy and use this upcoming plane crash as the example. So then he rattled off a few things. He says, like, for instance, when you're talking about temperature, being able to psychically be aware of the exact temperature, which is a mathematical computation, like you said, at this one plane crash, typically I might know that, and he smiled when he said that. He says, you say, I might know that it's exactly 103 degrees, but then on other events, I'll only know it's either cold or warm. And then he rattled off a few more details. And he says, when you talked about something that's ambiguous, you gave the example that even right now, you're not sure of a white building. You don't know if it's got windows or how tall or what, but it's a large white structure, and that you can't see it clearly. Things like that. So then he said, I think that this is a plane crash that you know about and it hasn't happened yet. Now, my real question for you is, the one thing that you've skirted and beat around the bush and tried, you seem like you try hard, but if you know this many details, I mean, first name basis of everybody on the plane, and if you know that much, you have got to be able to either know or figure out exactly where or exactly when this is going to take place. And he said, can you do that? Now, that was his real question. Well, all of the shocks took place in me. And then right away, again, he asked me a question, and it's typical of me to really try to answer any question anybody asked me. So I said, well, you're really right. And I'm saying, I've really been stupid about this thing about time. Because if I make it a priority, I should be able to at least do better. So I said, well, look, will you all just bear with me? And let me just think about the timing of this and give me a few seconds. So I fervently pondered, and I really tried hard. I thought of calendars. I thought of ambiguously, vaguely, like, where are we now? Is this the warm season, or is this June or July? And then, each thing wasn't working. So then I said, well, let me put it this way. Now, again, don't quote me on the exact dates that I'm going to give, because as I said it that day, I was exactly accurate. So I said something like, well, let me put it this way. It will happen sometime between the 1st of July of this year, but it will have to have had taken place by my birthday, which is the 1st of September. And however I said it, then I corrected myself. And, when I go like this, it's usually emphatically, and then that's fact. That's not ambiguous. And I says, in fact, it'll happen exactly halfway between that time. Now, however my mind works or doesn't work well, that I was accurate. In other words, I knew I was right, and it was halfway between that time I gave. And I was very satisfied that I zeroed in on the time frame that it would take place. Now, there was a problem regarding stating it that day, that time, because I wasn't aware of the date. In other words, as we're having this conversation, and this man asked me this question about time, typical of me, I wasn't aware of the calendar date. I could have figured out that it was July, but I didn't. And they were also very polite and compassionate, because I'm sure that all of the people in that room knew what I said. And the problem was with what I said was that it was already the second week in July that I was saying this. So if in fact, and again, never mind the math, the exact dates, but if I said it would happen from the 1st of July to the end of July, and I'm stating it in the second week in July, and then I state emphatically that it will be exactly halfway between that time, that means that it's only 48 or 72 hours possible to go before the event. Now, I wasn't aware of that. In other words, I wasn't aware of what I really said. I stated a fact, but I wasn't aware of where I was in time right then. So nobody blurted out, but Tom, that's less than 3 days from now. So that whole conversation ended that evening. And I went home not being aware at all of, we've only got 72 hours to go before this will have had taken place. Which only added to the frustration when I suddenly became aware of the day of the event. Now, basically what happened, the details don't matter that much, but I woke up that morning and went to work. Now, I opened the front door to my house and was walking out to leave, and the newspaper fell down that was in between the storm door and the door. Now, that is before the plane crashed. Excuse me. But I experienced seeing that newspaper fall down, and it sort of like told me, it was as though I had a slight image, if you will, of the newspaper as that newspaper would appear the next day. I mean, of course, it has to be the day after of the event in order to get it on the front page of the newspaper. And there was nothing at all on that newspaper that I was looking at, really. It was just the falling of the newspaper. Maybe it was just the timing that I was woke up enough and I was going to work, that maybe it was a subconscious awareness that this wasn't going to be a good day for me. So I realized that, and then out loud, even though there was nobody around, I said, oh shit, this is the day. I'm remembering too much. And it was distressing, but then I said, right away, caught myself and said, oh well. Yeah. And that's, I can never explain that. In other words, how can I ever say, oh well, and just go on with something else, like go and run a bulldozer in a landfill? But I went to work and I was mulling it over in my mind, that, well, this has to be, and there's nothing that I can do about it. In other words, the original precognition also stated that the fact is that an L1011 will crash, and that I'm aware of it, and that certain details have to be. I don't know if we'll have time for this conversation to go into some aspects where there were some variables that I could take a certain amount of responsibility to cushion or facilitate or something like that, which would make it a little bit easier for somebody. Say, to just go and hug somebody that has to deal with it on a psychological level would be a loving gesture. It would make it that much easier than if I were not aware of it. So I went to work, and then I've already stated that. And I'm not recalling right now, because I'm confusing this with another event that around 11 o'clock. I think that I have this accurate regarding my awareness around 11 o'clock in the morning, our time, that this was the day, and I was getting a little disturbed by running the loader at the time. So I parked the loader, and I went down and made arrangements for my replacement. and told my boss that I'm just not feeling well. It was very important to me because, see, I'd never excused myself from work. In other words, this was a major event in my life at the time to be either spiritual, psychic, or emotional enough to disrupt my job. My job was very important to me. And to not be in control and to have this take place. So I just stated to him that I would have to leave for the rest of the day. And my boss is very understanding, especially the fact that by this time he'd been aware that I'm usually dealing with things other than running bulldozers and loaders, that a majority of the time I may just be concentrating on quantum physics. And he's compassionate enough and understanding enough to know that if I make some kind of a silly request like, can I just sit down for 15 minutes other than a coffee break, he'll never refuse me. He'll instantly say, sure, Tom. And he'll say, do you want me to hang around or you want me to leave? So my good buddy and friend and boss, Fred Easton, is very instrumental in a great deal of my comfort regarding my employment. So at any rate, then I came home and I've already stated that I called Bruce Grayson on the phone and that the event took place. Now, I have to be honest and say that I'm very surprised that other researchers were very aware of the precognitive aspects of it when they obviously saw it on the news and heard it. Did not call me. I'm being honest. Because I was also dealing with it. Oh my God, now it's taken place and I shot my mouth off so much. I mean, and I was really down and out because oh my God, what have I really done? I mean, this plane crash had to take place, but I've shot my mouth off to dozens of people. I mean, dozens. I don't even know how many. And then I'm trying to remember how much did I tell this person or that person. Or now that this is going to be on the news, people are going to see it and say, oh my God, remember Tom was talking about the plane crash and he said that it would ricochet off a white building or it would land in the mud but not in an airport, or there was any detail that could only be associated with the actual event. In other words, in hindsight of the event, then the examples that I gave, the analogies, they're going to say, Tom Sawyer was talking about this months ago. Or so I was kind of saying, oh my God, the phone's going to start ringing. And then I have to be honest and say I was disappointed that the phone didn't ring off the hook. I got a few calls, but I wasn't deluged by physicists or, it was like people from the universities that I've been associated with. I was actually surprised, delighted in a way, because I don't think that would have been the best thing either for me. Might have been helpful to them in their research and so on, or just their, gee, I want to verify this with Tom. I can understand that, but so